Test 1, 2, 3. Test 1, 2, 3. Test 1, 2, 3. Test, 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 test. Okay, you go say something.
Huh?
Say something.
Oh, testing 1, 2, 3. Testing 1, 2, 3. Testing 1, 2, 3. Test, test.
Okay.
Test.
Now,
Okay.
now push the red button again.
Push the red button again.
Yeah.
All right, testing 1, 2, 3. We okay? In good shape? Very good.
Thank you.
Well, we're here today with J. Thomas King, who was a very significant political leader in Birmingham in the 50s and 60s, and so we want to hear his perspective on all of this. And Tom, thank you so much for being here.
Well,
And,
it's my pleasure.
Good. You indicated you wanted to start with your early life in terms of that you were a leader early on in your school and so forth. So why don't we talk about that?
Surely. I should call you doctor, I think, for this purpose. Is that correct?
You should call me Bob, I think.
Bob?
Yeah.
All right. Bob, I've known you since you were a wee child. And it being, as the case may be, foreordained that we were neighbors through your mother and father,
Right.
whom I loved dearly. Still love your mother, but
Thank you.
still miss your father.
We do too.
And but I remember you so well when you were a youngster living across the street from my father, the late Judge Alta L. King,
Right.
and his lovely wife, my stepmother, Pat. And but I remember that so well. Remember how grateful I was at having just gotten to know them. Your father was so very active when I ran for mayor of the city of Birmingham in 1961
Yeah.
and in 1963.
Yeah.
As to my political endeavors, I would say that my interest in politics grew really from my father, who later, in his later career, became a circuit judge, which is a part being played presently by my son, who's with us today, Tom King Jr. And Tom is a recent appointee of Governor Siegelman as circuit judge, as a circuit judge. My interest, as I said, was engendered in large part by my father, whom I loved dearly. And I remember so well in grammar school, where I went to two schools, Norwood Elementary and Barker Elementary schools.
Mm-hmm.
And in thinking about this interview, I gave certainly certain credit to the fact that throughout grammar school I was a president of the
I am so sorry. I'm new at this. I forgot to push the button on the record tape.
Oh, okay, that's fine.
So you
So
may
just
have
push,
to, yeah. I
just
can
push
either
record?
Push record, or if you want to start over so I can get it on this,
we're fine.
we can start over.
We're fine. Yeah,
I'm so sorry.
that's okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's fine. So we're in grammar school.
Yeah, I was back in elementary school. I suppose they still have it the same way. We had session rooms,
Mm-hmm.
and it was proper and right that we elected student officers
Mm-hmm.
from the first grade on through the 8th grade. And one could not succeed himself or herself. And so it was that I was elected president of my session room in alternate periods from the first grade through the 8th grade of those two elementary schools. And that certainly fomented my interest in political life, and particularly with my father being so interested himself.
Right.
And I remember so well going around with my dad throughout this county, helping him campaign with his political endeavors. And so then it followed that I went to high school at Phillips High School, which I attended quite recently as anniversary reunion
Oh, yeah.
at Phillips High School.
Right.
And there were some 800 Phillips graduates there on
How about that?
Sunday.
Uh-huh.
Tom Jr. was with me on that occasion. And anyway, we had a great time. I saw a few old friends that I knew. But I was elected president of the student body at Phillips High School my senior year. And then went on to the University of Alabama, where, as it were, I was elected president of what was called the Student Government Association at the University of Alabama. And I was proud of all those honors, and they were indeed considered by me to be an honor. And so it was that I had the pleasure of being elected during the year that the Constitution at the University of Alabama was formalized and changed, and so it was that I was able to appoint the first student government strike, the first student government cabinet,
Mm-hmm.
all the usual executive offices,
Mm-hmm.
as well as the first student court that was in existence at that time.
So let's just get the sort of the time frame here. Are we talking about in the 1940s?
1940.
46, 47, that neighborhood?
Yes, it was. That's exactly right. 46, 7. That's when it was.
Yeah. And this was not I mean, at the University of Alabama, this business of being president of the Student Government Association is not a small thing. A number of political careers have been launched at the University of Alabama through that mechanism. Our current governor, I believe, for example, was president of the SGA at Alabama.
Exactly.
I think several other individuals who have gone on to some prominence politically.
Yes, that's correct. The late Senator Lester Hill, the late Senator John Sparkman, and others, including a later opponent for that purpose, though we remained very close friends. Albert Boutwell was president of the student body at Alabama. Albert came after the two senators I referred to. And then it came my lot to fall under that situation later.
Well, I'm raising that question only because it would suggest that, you know, your interest in politics, serious politics in the state of Alabama, probably would have followed from that office of being SGA president. In other words, that at some point I would assume in your own mind you were thinking about entering into politics or the political life or the public service in Alabama. And that was part of your motivation in seeking the office.
It was. It was.
It was also traditional, I think, and has probably that tradition has continued on for many years, even after you were elected, that the office of SGA president was determined in large measure by a kind of political organization, often referred to as the machine at the university. It was a coalition of powerful fraternities and others. Was that in operation at the time you were elected?
Very definitely. In fact, during that term, there was a decided movement to rid the campus of the machine itself. And so I had in that campaign quite a campaign to be elected, and I was elected by a creditable majority, but it was closer than usual, and a gentleman by the name of Johnny Hill was my opponent, and he was an independent, and I was a fraternity man in Brotherhood of Alpha Tau Omega. And so the machine selected me as their candidate that year, and I did prevail over Johnny, who was a very fine man and would have made an outstanding president. But it followed that I became even more interested in after-school politics as a result of that election.
One of your classmates, I think, who was there at the time, who was perhaps involved in this election and at least in your candidacy, and y'all had, I think, some relationship that continued on after school, was Charles Morgan, Chuck Morgan. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And did you know Chuck before the university?
No, I did not.
So it was really in the context of this campaigning and becoming president of the SGA that you encountered Chuck Morgan and y'all got to know each other.
Exactly. And Chuck was a freshman when I ran or offered for the presidency of the student body. I was a senior, and he was this was pre-law, and I was in commerce school at the time. And before I finished my term, I was in law school. But I had the the good pleasure to appoint Chuck Morgan because of his interest and his ability to appoint Chuck to a major office in the student body, though he was only a freshman. But that put our friendship even closer than me just running and him helping.
Right.
And as a result, we formed a very formidable friendship at that time and during that year.
And that continued on even throughout your adult life and your career here in Birmingham.
Yes, sir.
So you went from undergraduate into law school pretty much in a kind of seamless fashion. One day you finished up your degree in the School of Commerce, and then pretty much the next semester you were entering into law school.
That's correct. Mm-hmm.
So you're
and
your
by
desire
then
to be
I
able-
was married. And,
Okay.
Indeed, my wife Norma and I, whom I lost several years ago,
Right.
She had Tom Jr., who is with us today, during that first year that I was, and the only year that I was president of the student body.
Oh, okay.
And,
So you became president of the SGA and a father in the same year. That's
correct.
yeah.
And it was, as I recall it, and I may be in error on this, but as I recall it, Tom Jr. was the first child born of a president of student body in office at that time. And I'm really quite certain that's correct.
Yeah, very interesting. You became interested in the law, I assume, because of your father's career, and you became a lawyer. You went through the University of Alabama Law School. When you graduated from law school, what were your immediate plans? What did you intend to do? Did you think about entering into practice right away, or did you go to work for the congressman at that point?
No, I had planned to practice law, and when I graduated from law school, it was during a time when a great many of my peers and many before me had preceded me in law school. And it was a day of a great number of World War II veterans entered law school that perhaps never would have gone to law school had it not been for the GI Bill.
Uh-huh.
And I think the statistics would bear that out as a good statement. In any event, when I graduated from law school, I was sort of a year too late.
Mm-hmm.
I've often characterized my career as laughingly as a day late and a dollar short, but it was true, because when I got out of law school, there was just no, there was a shortage of space in law offices throughout this city where I wanted to be, which is where my father was serving as a circuit judge at the time.
Right.
And I we had moved, of course, to Birmingham from Tuscaloosa, where my marriage began.
Mm-hmm.
And so you'll have to excuse me. I mentioned the space requirements were very short.
Mm-hmm.
Also, we had a great number of lawyers at the time, too many for the size and market of Birmingham, Alabama at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was not an easy thing to make what we called a connection
Right.
in those days. And as a result, I had certain difficulties and began practice with a good friend, a Mr. F. Raymond Ingram, I-N-G-R-A-M, who was my good friend. And
Mm-hmm.
I stayed with Mr. Ingram for quite a while. And then I had the opportunity through my good friend, Drew Redden,
Mm-hmm.
an outstanding lawyer, city of Birmingham to this day, and through George Huddleston, Jr., whose father served in Congress for this county for 22 years,
Mm-hmm.
and so through his son, George Huddleston, Jr., I had and Drew, and one R. Macy Taylor, who was later an assistant United States attorney. The three of us, all of them were assistants United States attorney. They rather took me under their wing out of law school and followed me, I assume, from that point on. And so when George Jr., well, first, George well, I was asked to join the city attorney's office
Okay.
at in the federal system.
Mm-hmm.
Stayed there for about 2 years, and then George Jr. was elected to Congress, having succeeded in time his father, who had been in Congress, as I said, for 22 years.
Mm-hmm.
So George Jr. was elected to Congress. I was then...
Let's again set the time frame. Are we talking about early 1950s, mid 1950s?
Yes, 1955, I believe.
Okay.
Yes, 1955.
Okay.
And I had been at U.S. Attorney's Office under Colonel John Hill, who was a reserve officer and full colonel,
Mm-hmm.
and when he was appointed United States Attorney. And so he appointed me to serve as through our senators.
So there won't be any confusion. This would be during the Eisenhower administration, but the appointments, I would assume, to the federal offices were oftentimes determined by the congressmen or the senators from that area.
That's correct.
So that whether you had a Republican or not in the White House, it would still be folks who would have connections to the Democratic leadership in the state that would be determining the appointments. So,
Right.
so everybody we're talking about here in terms of the Huddlestons and yourself and others, we're talking about Democrats now.
That's correct.
Okay, all right.
Exactly. And so, upon the election of George Huddleston Jr., it just seemed to fall into place after I got used to the idea that the new congressman, George Jr., asked me to go to Washington with him as his administrative assistant, was what it was called, by his office. Each office, it was up to each congressman to designate the title of the various staff members, and he designated administrative assistant. So Norma and I, along with Tom Jr., went to Washington after I'd been out of law school a couple of years, and we thereupon stayed in Washington for a 6-year period. And I did not plan to be there that long, but I found upon arrival and shortly thereafter that they had a very fine pension program on Capitol Hill in Washington. And so it followed that I decided to stay up there a little longer than necessary in order to qualify for the pension, which never came about because I had other fish to fry and didn't hang around long enough to, well, I did, but I frittered it away.
Well, let me ask you, so you're now, if you're working for Congressman Huddleston, what were your primary duties?
I was in administrative charge of his congressional office. It was my job to supervise 5 very, very qualified ladies who were secretaries, all from Birmingham, all from Jefferson County, and some of the best, most qualified secretaries I have ever experienced, despite many years afterwards, came from that office. And they were truly remarkable ladies.
And they primarily kept up with constituents, letters, mail, that sort of thing.
Right, and I did too. I did the primary dictation, but these ladies were so competent that after a short period of time they were able to prepare letters themselves and pretty well do that which is required of real good secretaries.
In this period, then, while you're in Washington, how do you maintain contact with other folks in Birmingham in terms of, was there frequent trips here? Were there occasions where I guess there would be issues that you would have to discuss with people here about that involve the congressman and so forth? Was that, how did that happen?
All right, we each congressman has his own way of doing things, as in each office throughout the city and state and nation, really, I'm sure. But George was a strong believer in communication, and he was a taskmaster, and he required that I, as the administrative leader of the office, get out mail, produce responses from letters arriving in our office in Washington from primarily Jefferson County, Alabama. as constituents. It was commonplace that the constituents would write about any matter of particular interest to the particular individual, whether it be legislative interest or veterans benefits or Social Security or whatever. And so it was my job primarily to oversee the ladies and the mail and to present it to Congressman Huddleston at the end of the day, because it must be realized that a congressman's duty is primarily to go to the Capitol, and in this case the House floor, and steer or guide or take a lead in the legislation, as opposed to my job, which was primarily administrative. At the same time, it was my job to know what the rules were and to apply the rules of the House, and to learn who the constituents were as best I could from my advantage, from my vantage point.
Mm-hmm.
And so George and I, as it were, made a very good team.
Did you advise him on policy matters?
When he asked,
Yeah.
when he asked, and sometimes when he didn't. And I never was one to keep my mouth too shut,
Yeah.
and so I was holding down the position and felt it a duty to advise him at times when I wasn't answered.
How would you describe his relationship with certain constituent groups in the area? One thinks about, for example, the big mules, so-called industrialists, people who really had a economic leadership here. How did he relate to those folks?
Fair, quite fair. George Huddleston Jr. was, I think, probably much like his father, George Sr., in that George Jr. Liked to get along with people. And he pretty well played it in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
And he had many friends on both sides. He managed to have the support of big interest, is what it was called,
Mm-hmm.
and economic, you might call it barons, as well as labor unions. Back then, it was not in keeping with the times to pay a lot of attention to our black population. But I will say this on behalf of George, who befriended me in many ways, that he was always a fair man.
Mm-hmm.
With his black constituents. And I've spent many an hour as his assistant administratively to help blacks, and enjoyed that work, and made a lot of friends in that connection.
Let me raise a question, if we can, then, about that whole period. We're talking about the mid-50s up to the time you left to come back to Birmingham, which was around 1960 or 61.
Mm-hmm.
There's a good bit going on here. We've had the Brown decision And that's begun to chip away, at least in some fashion, with segregation in the South. Not so quickly in Birmingham as elsewhere, but at least it's the law. Then you have also the rise of what's generally termed the civil rights movement. You had the creation of the Alabama Christian Movement for Human Rights, led by Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth here in Birmingham, which was beginning to demonstrate and agitate for civil rights, challenging bus segregation, challenging school segregation. As you probably remember, Fred Shuttlesworth attempted to enroll his children at Phillips High School and was severely beaten in the process, along about 57 or 58. So he had a good bit of Fred Shuttlesworth's home, church were bombed. He had a lot going on here in Birmingham relating to issues of race. How did that impact your work with Huddleston, or how did that impact Huddleston as he addressed those kinds of issues?
Well, I will say this, that it was George's theory that he could not serve too long if he took a strong stand in those days for one side or the other. And as a result, he did what I later regarded was the proper stance, in that he stayed away from that sort of issue as much as he could. And that was so true of every other member of Congress from Alabama. Now, as a younger person just out of law school, having been back in Birmingham for only 2 years, I believe, I did not understand that at first, because I had been raised in such a way that I had stronger views about what later became known as civil rights than did my employer, George Jr. And I say that not other than in deference of him, because he was on the firing line daily, whereas I was merely an employee of George Jr. And was freer to state my views, particularly in Washington, than was he.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that will be understood by anyone that knows his way around a little bit politically. For I was freer than George. George was as fair, in my opinion, as me. But let's say that was his situation. I had a different one.
Yeah.
We all wear different hats.
In terms of communication about what was happening here, or kind of getting a sense of what was going on, whether things were getting better or getting worse, were there regular communications? Did y'all keep in touch with folks here, kind of knowing how things were going?
Yes, we had, I'm sure this is true of every congressman in the history of our country. They have their own particular, special constituents who they learn either through experience or passage of time who they can rely on as far as quality of letters, theories that are espoused by certain people, and so forth, so that one learns through experience what and who he can rely on.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was that George Jr. had his own particular people, which was beyond my purview. I never attempted to interfere with that or to well, enough said on that point.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, he had a probably anywhere from 10 to 50 correspondents at any given time on given issues, because we all have our own interest. And so...
Do you know where the records of his office are, his congressional office? Were they archived someplace? Do you
I
know?
do not know.
I'm thinking as you're talking about these letters, whether they would still exist somewhere.
And you do not know, Doctor?
I don't. Yeah.
I don't know. George, in an upset, was defeated after some many years of service. As is so often the case, he I always considered that he didn't campaign hard enough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this was not in '64 when John Buchanan was elected.
Yes, it was.
Okay.
Yes.
That was the year of the Goldwater
Yes.
campaign. And
Yeah, the
Goldwater.
Goldwater campaign, and George underestimated Goldwater's strength and the Republican strength in Jefferson County.
It's a turning point, really, in the terms of the so-called Southern strategy for Republicans.
Right. Right.
And from that point on, really, the Republicans.
Indeed, Norma and I had we had moved to the eastern section upon my return from Washington. We bought a home in the eastern section.
Mm-hmm.
And again, just a matter of my father's influence on me. He suggested that location, and I quickly agreed,
Yeah.
as did my wife. And
Well, I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves. Let's just, I wanted to ask this question following up on the question of communications and correspondence and so forth with the congressman, so that when you made the decision to come back to Birmingham and to become engaged in political life in the city, you were not doing that naively. You knew what kinds of issues had been going on in the city. You knew about the racial turmoil which had occurred. I mean, you had a sense of what was happening here politically before you returned.
that's correct. And to go back to our old friend, Chuck Morgan,
Mm-hmm.
Chuck was very instrumental in keeping both George Jr. and me informed of local for lack of better terminology, politics,
Mm-hmm.
the nuances of people and the way things were swinging and so
Mhm.
forth. And Chuck was very, very acutely balanced at such matters,
Mm-hmm.
as was I,
Mm-hmm.
as was George. Pretty well have to be to get anywhere politically.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is to be particularly or especially successful. So Chuck was one of the main constituents that kept us informed. And there were others, to be sure.
Mm-hmm.
Macy Taylor that I referred to, Drew Redden that I referred to,
Mm-hmm.
were regular correspondents.
Who among this group approached you, or maybe gave you the thought about perhaps running for office here in Birmingham, about returning to Birmingham and running for office?
I would say that would be Chuck Morgan.
Yeah. And at that point in time, we're talking about...
The other two were very much involved practicing law.
Yeah. So you returned actually in 1960 or in 61?
Late 60.
Okay. So we're talking about in a period after the 1960 election.
Mm-hmm.
Huddleston would have been reelected, so he's
Mm-hmm.
back in office.
Mm-hmm.
John F. Kennedy has been elected president
Mm-hmm.
by the narrowest of margins.
Mm-hmm.
But at that point, you decided to return to Birmingham with a consideration of the fact that there would be an election upcoming in 1961, or just this was an appropriate time.
With that consideration, but it was not. It was not a thing done by any means at that point. It was a matter for consideration. Just like timing is so important in anything we do in life, I think, and it was in connection with, would I run for anything? What, if anything, would I run for, and when? It was not, the timing was not there when I left Washington.
Mm-hmm.
But it was a matter for consideration.
Well, it would have to be a matter, it seems, for pretty quick consideration, since the primary, as I recall, was in April or so of 1961.
Yes.
And that would be in order to prepare a mayoral campaign, at least you would need to be back in the city and put together an organization of some sort. Unless there was already kind of a skeleton of an organization, maybe Chuck Morgan or others were working on it in advance, or...
Well, I don't know how much work was being done at that point in time. More than I anticipated, I'm sure of that.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say among those who were most active, aside from Chuck and Drew Redden, there were several others, including Bill Hairston, who was later president of Birmingham Bar and the State Bar.
Mm-hmm.
Stan Starnes, now deceased, who was president of Birmingham Bar later,
Mm-hmm.
and Drew Redden, who was president of State Local Bar and State Bar. So those were, in addition to Chuck, and they were longtime friends, and indeed the latter three, except for Chuck, were all fraternity brothers of mine. They were fellow ATOs.
Okay.
I found that in that, particularly when I announced that I would run for mayor, quickly there came these others, and Chuck had been there throughout.
Yeah.
The others were busy practicing law, but they came to my assistance.
One name you haven't mentioned is that of David Vann. Was he in this early group, or did he come later?
He came somewhat later.
Okay. Was he brought
he
into?
was in the other group, but more in I guess in '63 than.
Okay.
No, he wasn't. He was in the earlier group because he supported Albert Bottle in the later group, the '63 group.
So in thinking about now the decision to run in '61, having talked it over, I'm sure, having had Chuck Morgan and others sort of advise you, was the central thrust of the discussion that there needed to be a more progressive candidate for mayor, that there needed to be someone who perhaps would begin to challenge the city to move in a different direction from what it appeared to be moving at that point? I'm probing for how self-consciously this was done, or whether it was just that you were a good candidate who would make a good mayor.
I think it was the latter rather than any preconceived statement of intent and policy and so forth. I remember so well when I did announce, I was given, you see, I had been in Washington primarily for 6 years.
Right.
And so I was given the names of particular people I should go see, like the Pizitzes, the elder Pizitz and his sons, and
Isadora.
yeah, right.
His sons Richard and I'm forgetting
Michael.
Michael, yes. And they were, in particular, pointed out to you because of their prominence as retailers in Birmingham.
That's
obviously.
right, and also our good friend with Parisians,
Emil Hess.
Emil, and the can't recall his name. Wonderful person, Jim Lee.
Oh yeah, Jimmy Lee at
Jimmy Lee.
Buffalo Rock.
Yeah, Buffalo Rock.
Mm-hmm. What about
Bob Corley?
what about Crawford Johnson at Coca-Cola? Was he a part of the group?
No, he was not. They were for me.
Yeah.
But he did not participate in that campaign actively. But Coca-Cola was for me.
Any folks representing banks or other larger employers that you can recall?
Yes. So many of these have passed on. Bank for Savings, you remember the leadership? Bank for Savings?
Yeah, at this point I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Wallace Malone and crowd came later.
Yes.
So I'm not sure.
And I did not know them.
Yeah. What about the Exchange Security Bank or?
They were my father's bankers.
Yeah.
And were for me for that reason.
Yeah.
But they did not take a real active part in my campaign.
Okay.
Though they supported my candidacy.
Right. What about the labor unions?
Very definitely.
Yeah.
Barney Weeks.
Yeah. Steel workers, remember?
Howard Strevel.
Yeah.
Can you name some more as a reminder?
Yeah, my mind is blank around that too. Of course,
Well, they shouldn't
attorney
be.
Buddy Cooper.
Thurman Coggins,
Yeah. Bill Mitch.
Bill Mitch, good friend, still is.
What about Buddy Cooper?
Buddy, very close
Yeah.
to this day.
Yeah. Abe Berkowitz, was he involved?
Yes, not by virtue of kinship. He was not as active as the others,
Mm-hmm.
but he was for me.
Mm-hmm.
I say that confidently without being able to note any particular activity other than knowing he was for me.
Of course, some of these folks we've named did not live in the city of Birmingham. They might have
Right.
had businesses
Right. Correct.
here, but again, that was a typical kind of situation.
Well, Buddy and Bill Mitch were representing as attorneys many of the labor unions at that
That's right.
time.
That's right.
They both assisted me later in becoming an arbitrator. And so they've been friends for many years over many activities.
Yeah, good. We're approaching the end of the first hour, and I don't want to get us deep into a discussion of the 61 campaign. I'd like to take a break and reserve some time where we
Sure.
can talk about it in some detail, if that's okay with you.
Sure.
Are you?
I would like to say that
Sure.
I was on the verge of pointing out that just before George was defeated by John Buchanan, surprisingly, to him, it was not to me.
Mm-hmm.
Because I remember so well that Norm and I had this very well attended coffee, as big day for coffees, when George ran for re-election. John Buchanan, his opponent. And in the meantime, well, I divert briefly. As it were, George was my ex-employer. John Buchanan, at that point in time, attended the Huffman Baptist Church with his wife.
Mm-hmm.
We had joined the Huffman Baptist Church, so we were, John and I were in a play at the Huffman Baptist Church together just before that election. I always will remember that because we just hit it off.
Yeah.
And
What, you remember what the play was?
no, I don't.
Yeah.
I don't. It had nothing to do with political world.
Yeah. I could imagine both of you being quite comfortable on the stage. I think that would be
Yes, we were.
an interesting thing to watch.
Yeah.
I would have paid whatever the price of the ticket was to
Really?
see that.
Good.
I mean,
Well, that's quite a compliment. I found John to be quite well met, and we just got along fine. And he was my boss's opponent at that particular point when the church put on this.
I'm sure he ran as in '64 as a conservative Republican, but
Yes, he did.
as you'll recall, during the course of his career, he became much more a progressive Republican.
Correct.
And
Correct.
by the time he actually left office, he was probably considered as liberal as any Democrat.
He was.
Yeah.
He
And a
was.
very good man. I also
Yes, he
have had the pleasure of his
Right.
company and knowing him, and he's
Yeah.
a fine man. Why don't we
Very
stop?
fine man. So is Albert Lee Smith, with whom I was later in church at First Baptist Church at Birmingham
Yeah,
in recent years, just before his.
but not nearly so successful a politician, I think.
Oh no,
Yeah,
not nearly.
yeah. Why don't we pause here and we'll.
I wanted to just finish this. That
Sure,
we
I'm
had
sorry.
this big coffee, and at that point, See, we had recently returned to Birmingham,
Mm-hmm.
and had made somewhat of a splash, I suppose, though I didn't think of it in those terms. Say we'd been in this play and so forth, and then I had taken on the job of teaching Sunday school and joining the YMCA and the Optimist Club, so forth. So I had made a lot of friends, and I had general plans to be a candidate for mayor, though they were quite general at the time. So anyway, had a huge turnout, and George was, I'm sure, buoyed by the turnout in the eastern section. And I always shall remember at the back of our house, I had a long conference with George Huddleston, Jr. And I told him, I said, George, you're in danger shortly of being defeated. And he had just come down from Washington, and he didn't have the feel for the people. He said, no. Well, anyway, several days later he was defeated. And from that point on, George didn't return to Birmingham.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, I want that to be stricken from the record, because I would not want George to be known for not returning to his hometown when he was defeated, but that's a fact.
Yeah.
Will that be stricken?
Oh, I'm sure we could, have that not transcribed.
Yeah,
that's fine.
if you would do that.
Although I must say, I'm sure people noticed he didn't come back.
Well, I'm sure it is true.
Yeah.
No doubt about that. But he just thought that he was going to be elected.
Well, why don't we'll pause here,
Okay.
give you a chance to stretch your legs, and then we can talk about the 61 campaign.
Sure.
At
Sure.
some leisure.
If I'm talking too much or too long on any one subject.
No, you're doing great. This is very interesting to me. I'm going to stop this right here.
We go to the restroom?
Yeah, I believe it
Yeah,
shall
let's
this
see.
time.
I'm not
Dad,
sure.
you like a fascinating interview. So we need to disconnect you, don't we?
Yeah.
I'm going to see if that.